The lobby of the Grand Oak Hotel was quiet in the early afternoon. The polished floors gleamed under the overhead lights, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Guests lounged in the plush armchairs, their voices barely a whisper as they chatted or read their books. It was the kind of peaceful ambience that gave people a break from the world outside, a space to recharge before diving back into their busy lives. Clint Eastwood walked in, his broad shoulders hunched slightly from the weight of the years, but his piercing blue eyes still sharp. He was in his late 80s now, but the iconic aura he carried from decades of films was still unmistakable. He moved through the lobby like he owned the place, though, of course, he didn't. Not yet, anyway. Clint had been coming to the Grand Oak for years. He was just another regular face in the hotel to the staff. Some of the employees knew him by sight, others knew him by reputation, but no one ever made a big deal about it. Clint wasn't one for drama. He preferred to keep to himself. At least, that's what he told himself. He glanced around the room, noting the usual crowd. A couple of businessmen huddled together, discussing their next big deal. A woman sat by the window, lost in her book, her coffee steaming beside her. Nothing out of the ordinary. He made his way to the front desk, nodding politely at the receptionist as he approached. "Mr. Eastwood," the young woman behind the desk said with a smile. "Welcome back, as always. Your room is ready." "Thanks," Clint muttered, offering a brief smile. His voice, gravelly but warm, still had the charm that had once commanded attention. "Just give me the key. I'll take the usual." The receptionist handed him the key card, her eyes twinkling with a mix of excitement and curiosity. Clint had been coming here for years now, but there was still something about his presence that left a ripple in the air. He didn't acknowledge her look. He never did. Clint wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here for the recognition. As he turned away, he almost bumped into a young man walking briskly in his direction. The man, a waiter, by the looks of his uniform, stumbled back, his eyes narrowing as he caught Clint's gaze. Clint raised an eyebrow. The waiter, clearly unbothered, let out a short laugh and waved a hand dismissively. "Sorry, old man," he said, not realizing who he was speaking to. "You gotta watch where you're going." Clint didn't flinch. He didn't even say anything. But the waiter, Charlie, as he was known to the staff, wasn't done. As Clint took a few more steps, Charlie watched him go. "Guess you can't teach an old dog new tricks," he muttered under his breath. Probably gonna go check into his little fancy room and nap the rest of the day away. Clint heard the words, but he didn't turn back. He kept walking, letting them go in one ear and out the other. He wasn't a stranger to insults. After decades in the limelight, he'd heard it all, mocked for his age, for his roles, even for his rough, no-nonsense persona. But something about the way the young waiter had said it, it was different. It wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal of everything he had built, everything he had done in his life. Still, Clint kept his cool. He wasn't one to escalate things, especially not over something so trivial. He continued on to the elevator, silently fuming but trying to let it go. After all, he had better things to worry about. But just as he was about to press the button for the elevator, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Charlie again. This time, he was carrying a tray of drinks, moving quickly to serve a table in the lounge. As he passed Clint, he gave a smirk, clearly thinking he was being witty. "You know, you remind me of that guy in all those old westerns," Charlie said, his voice loud enough for Clint to hear. "You're probably too old to be galloping across the plains, huh? I mean, come on, the 80s are over, Grandpa." Clint froze for a moment, his hand hovering over the elevator button. He wanted to turn around, to give Charlie a piece of his mind, but something stopped him. He wasn't sure if it was the fact that the waiter was so clearly ignorant of who he was or if it was just the sheer audacity of the comments. Either way, Clint wasn't sure he wanted to dignify it with a response. But something told him that he might have to. Charlie didn't notice Clint's hesitation as he walked past, too caught up in his own thoughts. He was on autopilot, doing his job, acting like the same smart aleck he always did. He didn't know who Clint Eastwood was, didn't recognize the man standing in front of him. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was easier that way. Clint took a deep breath and stepped into the elevator. He pushed the button to his floor, the doors closing behind him. But as the elevator began its slow ascent, Clint found himself thinking about Charlie. About the arrogance of youth, and how quickly it could burn out. He didn't want to feel anger, he was too old for that. But for some reason, the waiter's words stuck with him. Maybe it was because Clint had spent so much of his life earning respect, earning everything he had, and here was this young guy, belittling him without even knowing who he was. As the elevator moved up, Clint let out a long sigh. He could feel the years weighing on him, but that wasn't why he was bothered. It was the reminder that some people just didn't get it. They didn't understand the hard work, the sacrifices, the decades of striving for something bigger than themselves. The doors slid open, and Clint stepped out onto the quiet hallway of the hotel. It was a familiar path, his suite was just a few doors down. As he walked toward it, he wondered if Charlie would ever realize who he had just insulted. Probably not, he thought. But maybe, just maybe, Clint would find a way to show him. He slid the key card into the door and entered his suite, the door clicking shut behind him. It was time to unwind, to find peace. But as he sat by the window, looking out over the city, Clint couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over yet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Charlie Bennett wasn't exactly the kind of guy who lived for other people's approval. Born and raised in the tough parts of Chicago, he learned early on that life wasn't kind. But it wasn't about how hard life hit you, it was about how you responded. Charlie had learned to throw a punch, but more importantly, he had learned to dodge one. His quick wit, sharp tongue, and sarcastic humor had always served him well. They were his armor. At 25, Charlie had seen enough of the world to know that nothing came easy. His family had struggled to make ends meet, and after his high school days were over, he found himself in a series of dead-end jobs. But he always kept his head up, always tried to make the best of it. He wasn't afraid to take risks, and he certainly wasn't afraid of putting people in their place when they stepped out of line. But the Grand Oak Hotel was different from any other job he had ever had. It wasn't just another corporate gig. This was a place where the wealthy, the elite, and the famous came to escape the world. And in this world, Charlie wasn't just a waiter. He was a small part of something much bigger. The way the staff was trained, the level of service expected, the meticulous attention to detail, it all demanded a level of professionalism that was hard to come by. And that's what Charlie hated most about it. He didn't mind serving the rich, but what bothered him was the whole culture that came with it. The way people tiptoed around the wealthy guests, giving them special treatment like they were royalty. It felt fake, forced, and completely unnecessary. In his eyes, the money didn't make them better than anyone else. But that was the game he had to play if he wanted to keep the job. And it wasn't like he had many options. The job at the Grand Oak was the best one he had in years. The pay was decent, and it got him out of the tough parts of town. Plus, he had dreams of being a comedian, this was just a stepping stone, he told himself. A way to bide time until his big break. Still, he found himself rolling his eyes at most of the guests. The regulars, who came in every week, staying in their fancy rooms, sipping overpriced drinks, all while acting like the world owed them something. People like Clint Eastwood, for example. Charlie had only seen Clint a handful of times, but it wasn't hard to spot a celebrity. Clint had that unmistakable aura, the kind of presence that made you turn your head just to get a second glance. But Charlie wasn't one to get starstruck. He had grown up watching Clint's movies, sure, but to him, Clint Eastwood was just another old guy. An actor who had his heyday in the 70s and 80s, but who now just seemed to fade into the background, trying to live out his last days in peace. And so, when he saw Clint walking through the lobby earlier that day, Charlie didn't think twice about it. Sure, it was Clint Eastwood, but that didn't mean he had to treat him any differently than anyone else. To Charlie, the famous faces were just regular people trying to blend in. He had a job to do. He wasn't there to act like some starstruck fan. But Clint's appearance, and the way he carried himself, rubbed Charlie the wrong way. The guy was older, probably used to being fawned over, and Charlie wasn't about to indulge him. He had seen too many rich and famous types walk through these doors thinking they could treat people like dirt just because of their status. As Charlie continued to serve drinks and clear tables, he couldn't help but stew over the brief interaction with Clint. The old man had looked right through him. And yeah, maybe Charlie had been a little snarky, but what did Clint expect? People didn't just get to live in their ivory towers and demand respect without earning it. Clint was no different from the rest of them, right? But the more he thought about it, the more something about Clint's calm demeanor irritated him. The guy didn't even flinch at Charlie's comments. He didn't get angry, didn't even react. And that bothered Charlie. It was like Clint knew something he didn't. It was like Clint had been through enough of life to know that this kind of stuff, this petty insult, didn't matter. Still, Charlie wasn't about to apologize. What was the point? Clint wasn't going to remember him, and even if he did, what difference would it make? He was just a waiter, after all. Just another cog in the machine. Later that evening, when Charlie was wiping down the bar, his manager, Lisa, came up to him with a raised eyebrow. "Charlie, we need to have a word," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Charlie wiped his hands on his apron. "What's up?" "I just got a call from Mr. Eastwood's room. He wants to speak with you." Charlie froze. His stomach dropped. The last thing he needed was to be called out by some rich, famous guest who thought he could get away with anything. "Did he say what it was about?" Charlie asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart was racing. Lisa shook her head. "No, just that he wants to speak to you." He sounded calm, but, well, you know how these things go. Charlie gulped. "Right. Okay." He didn't even know what to think. Was Clint upset about the jokes? The comments? He didn't know how to feel. He had made plenty of snarky remarks to guests before, but no one had ever called him out on it directly. Not like this. Taking a deep breath, Charlie walked over to the elevator, feeling the weight of his actions sink in. He had no idea what was going to happen next. He could go up there and apologize, try to smooth things over. But part of him didn't want to. Part of him wanted to stand his ground. He didn't know who Clint Eastwood really was. He didn't know the man behind the movies, the legend. All he knew was what he saw in the lobby, just another guy who had been too comfortable in his fame. And Charlie wasn't going to bend over backwards just because someone was famous. The elevator doors closed behind him as it ascended to the top floor, and for the first time, Charlie wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe this was the moment everything would change. Maybe this was the day he would learn what it really meant to respect someone, not because of who they were, but because of what they had endured. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Charlie stepped into the quiet, dimly lit hallway. His heart was still pounding in his chest as he walked toward Clint Eastwood's suite. The silence around him felt heavy, the quiet of the hallway pressing in on him. Every step felt like a slow march toward something he couldn't quite predict. It wasn't like walking toward a typical guest, this was Clint Eastwood. A name that carried weight, even if Charlie had tried to pretend it didn't. He stopped in front of the door. The suite was spacious, luxurious in the way only high-end hotels could manage, rich velvet drapes, deep mahogany furniture, and gold accents that screamed wealth and exclusivity. It was all so, over the top. And yet, Clint hadn't seemed impressed by any of it. When Charlie had seen him earlier, Clint had walked through the lobby like he owned the place, but in a way that wasn't cocky or boastful. It was just confidence. Charlie knocked once, then twice, and waited. A few moments later, the door swung open, and there stood Clint Eastwood. His graying hair was neatly combed back, his face as weathered as ever. There was no trace of anger on his face, just a calm, measured expression. He stood in the doorway, his eyes assessing Charlie carefully. "Come in, kid," Clint said in his gravelly voice, his tone neither warm nor cold. "I assume you're here for a reason." Charlie hesitated. Part of him wanted to turn around and run. Another part, the stubborn part, was telling him to stand his ground. He wasn't some starstruck fan. He wasn't going to apologize for something he didn't think was a big deal. But as Clint motioned for him to step inside, something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the way Clint's presence filled the room, or maybe it was the sheer weight of the moment. Either way, Charlie stepped in. The suite was quiet, almost eerily so. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of a newspaper Clint had been reading. The older man motioned to a chair by the window, gesturing for Charlie to sit down. "I don't bite," Clint added with a small smirk, though his eyes remained serious. Charlie sat, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. Clint took the seat across from him, his gaze never wavering. There was something almost intimidating about the way Clint sat, his body language was relaxed, yet it spoke of years of experience in handling people. "Now," Clint said after a pause, leaning forward slightly. "You and I had a little run-in earlier. I think we should talk about it." Charlie opened his mouth to speak, but Clint held up a hand, cutting him off. "Listen, I'm not here to make you feel bad," Clint continued. "I just want to understand where you're coming from. You think I'm just some old guy who doesn't know his place anymore, don't you?" Charlie's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected Clint to come right out and say it like that. It was one thing to think it. It was another thing for Clint to call him out on it so bluntly. I didn't mean it like that," Charlie muttered, trying to maintain his composure. "It's just, I see so many people walking around here like they're better than everyone else. And, you seemed like another one of those guys. I didn't know you were, well, you." Clint chuckled softly, a low, throaty sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "You didn't know I was me," Clint repeated, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I guess that makes sense. You're young. You don't remember when I was in my prime, when I was on every magazine cover and in every movie theater across the country. To you, I'm just another old man walking around a hotel, taking up space." Charlie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He hadn't meant to insult Clint, he hadn't meant to dismiss him in such a direct way. But he couldn't deny the truth in what Clint had said. He had only seen the older, faded version of the man, not the one who had once shaped the landscape of cinema. "I didn't know what I was saying," Charlie admitted, looking down at his hands. "I'm sorry. I don't know. I guess I was frustrated. It's hard working here, watching people act like they own the place." Clint nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I get it," he said. "I've been in your shoes. But there's a difference between standing up for yourself and disrespecting someone. I know it's tough when people don't see you, when they don't understand what you're going through. I've had my share of people who've written me off too. But I've learned a thing or two in my life." Charlie looked up at Clint, a bit surprised. "What do you mean?" Clint leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as he began to speak. "I've been in the business for decades. I've seen actors come and go, directors burn out, and people rise to the top only to fall just as quickly. You learn something when you've been around long enough. You learn that it's not about the fame, the money, or the recognition. It's about the work. The effort you put in. The people you meet along the way. Charlie's mind started to race. He had never really thought of Clint Eastwood like that before, like someone who had struggled, who had learned from the grind of the industry. He had always seen him as a living legend, someone who was above it all. But here he was, sitting in front of him, a man who had been knocked down just like everyone else, and still managed to rise up. "You think it's easy for me?" Clint continued, his voice soft but steady. "I had to fight for everything. Every role, every opportunity. There were plenty of people who told me I wasn't good enough, that I was too rough around the edges. But I kept going. I didn't let their words define me." Charlie nodded, his earlier defensiveness starting to fade. Clint's words were hitting him in a way he hadn't expected. He had always been quick to judge, quick to throw out his opinions without knowing the full story. He had dismissed Clint as just another celebrity, but now he was realizing how wrong he had been. "I see now," Charlie said, his voice quieter. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." Clint's gaze softened, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely understanding. "It's all right. But if you want to get anywhere in life, kid, you've got to start looking past the surface. People are more than what they seem. You've got to dig deeper. And sometimes, it's the people you least expect who have the most to teach you." Charlie let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maybe this wasn't just about Clint Eastwood. Maybe it was about him, too. About learning to be better, to see the world through a different lens. "Thanks," Charlie said quietly. "I won't forget this." Clint gave a small nod, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "Good. Now, get out of here. And don't make a habit of insulting people. Especially not old guys like me." As Charlie stood to leave, he felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just an apology. This was a lesson. And he wasn't about to forget it. As the door clicked shut behind him, Clint leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Maybe the young man had learned something today. And maybe, just maybe, Clint had found a little bit of himself in the process, too. The elevator doors closed behind Charlie with a soft ding as it descended from the top floor. He leaned against the cold, polished walls, trying to process what had just happened. His heart had calmed down, but the weight of the conversation with Clint Eastwood still lingered in his mind. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted inside of him. Charlie wasn't one for deep self-reflection. He was usually too busy keeping up appearances, making quick jokes, or putting on a tough exterior. But that conversation with Clint had pulled him out of his comfort zone. For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt small. And in that smallness, there was something humbling. As the elevator descended, Charlie couldn't help but replay Clint's words in his mind. The part about looking past the surface, about not letting people's judgment define you. It had hit hard. In a job like his, where the world often felt like a circus of wealthy guests and power plays, it was easy to start judging others based on what they wore or how they acted. But Clint's words, about digging deeper, were like a crack in the facade of Charlie's own judgmental nature. The elevator doors opened with another soft chime, and Charlie stepped out into the main floor. The lobby was busy, filled with people checking in and out, chatting on their phones, or reading the newspaper. Nothing had changed. The world was still spinning, and Charlie still had a job to do. But everything felt a little different now. It wasn't just about serving drinks and clearing plates anymore. It was about seeing people. Really seeing them. Charlie walked back to the bar, where Lisa was wiping down the counter. She gave him a quick look, her expression unreadable. "So," she said, eyes narrowing slightly. "How did it go?" Charlie hesitated, unsure how to answer. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he went up there, but it wasn't this. It wasn't a heart-to-heart conversation. And yet, in a weird way, it had been just that. It went, "All right," Charlie said, choosing his words carefully. "He's not what I thought he was." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. What do you mean? Charlie leaned against the bar, his arms crossed. I thought he was just some washed-up actor who thought he could walk all over everyone. But I was wrong. He's been through a lot, you know. He's not just Clint Eastwood. He's a person. Lisa studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Sounds like you learned something tonight. Yeah, I guess I did, Charlie said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Guess I owe him an apology. Lisa laughed softly. Probably a good idea. Charlie rubbed the back of his neck, still processing the conversation. I don't know if I'll ever see him the same way again. It's not just about the movies or the fame. It's about what's behind all that, the stuff people don't see. Lisa's expression softened. I get it. It's easy to judge people when you don't know their story. But it's not about their story, right? It's about your story, and how you choose to see them. Charlie looked at Lisa, taken aback by her words. She was right, of course. He had spent so much time focused on his own frustrations, his own struggles, that he hadn't even considered what other people might be going through. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe his entire perspective needed a shift. Maybe it was time for him to start seeing the world through a different lens. Instead of viewing people as obstacles or as part of the system that was holding him back, maybe he needed to start looking for the humanity in each person he encountered. Whether they were famous or not. I think I've been missing the point all along, Charlie said slowly, almost to himself. It's not just about the job. It's about how I see people. And I need to start doing that better. Lisa gave him a small smile. You're getting it. And trust me, it'll make all the difference. Charlie's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from his brother, Tom. You good, bro? Heard you had an interesting shift. Let me know when you get off. Got something to talk about. Charlie raised an eyebrow. Tom was always the more serious one, always thinking 2 steps ahead. That usually meant he had something on his mind, and it was rarely good news. Looks like my night's not over, Charlie muttered to Lisa as he read the message again. I'll catch you later. Take care of yourself, Charlie, she said with a wink, already moving on to clean another table. Charlie stepped out into the cool night air, the hotel's glass doors whooshing closed behind him. He didn't know what Tom wanted, but something told him it was going to be one of those life talks that Tom loved so much. As he walked to his car, Charlie reflected on his encounter with Clint again. There was something oddly peaceful about the older man, something that made Charlie want to approach life with a bit more grace and understanding. Maybe it was the realization that everyone had a story, whether they were famous or not. When he finally got into his car, Charlie hesitated before starting the engine. His thoughts were swirling with everything he'd learned today. He had always been quick to judge. Quick to write people off as just another celebrity or just another rich person. But Clint had made him see how shallow that thinking really was. It wasn't just about who someone was on the surface. It was about what they had been through, what they had fought for, and how they carried themselves despite the odds. Charlie's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the hotel's app. An alert flashed on the screen. Room 503, Clint Eastwood. Complimentary dinner voucher. Please confirm. Charlie blinked. For a moment, he thought maybe he had read it wrong. But then it hit him. Clint had given him a voucher. A gesture of kindness, or maybe just an acknowledgement of their earlier conversation. Either way, Charlie was taken aback. He had assumed Clint wouldn't think twice about the encounter. But here it was, a small but meaningful gesture. A way of showing that he had been heard, that things had been smoothed over. It wasn't just about the apology anymore, it was about respect. Real respect. Charlie stared at the screen for a moment before he hit confirm. He wasn't just accepting a voucher for a free dinner. He was accepting the opportunity to make things right. Maybe Clint had more to teach him than just how to handle difficult situations. As he drove off into the night, Charlie realized that this was only the beginning of his transformation. It wasn't about celebrities, it wasn't about wealth. It was about learning to see things for what they truly were. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand that. Charlie had barely made it home when his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and saw another text from Tom. "Where are you? Meet me at the diner in 30. Got news?" The urgency in Tom's message was unmistakable. Charlie quickly changed out of his uniform and grabbed his jacket, heading straight to the diner. He knew from experience that when Tom had something to say, it was rarely small talk. His brother had always been the responsible one, the one who played it safe, the one with a plan. Charlie, on the other hand, had always been more spontaneous, taking life as it came, sometimes too recklessly for his own good. The diner was quiet when Charlie walked in, the sound of the jukebox playing softly in the background. Tom was sitting in a booth by the window, staring at his phone with a frown on his face. He looked up when Charlie approached, and without a word, he gestured for him to sit. "You good?" Tom asked, his voice serious. Charlie slid into the booth across from him. "Yeah, just, been a weird night." Tom raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story. "Weird how?" Charlie hesitated. He didn't know where to start. The conversation with Clint had left him feeling a little lost, a little out of touch with the person he had been before. But he wasn't about to unload all of that on Tom. Instead, he just shrugged. "You know, just one of those nights. Ran into someone I wasn't expecting. Kind of made me rethink some things." Tom nodded, clearly not satisfied with the answer, but he didn't press. Instead, he put his phone down and leaned forward, locking eyes with Charlie. "All right, here's the deal," Tom said, his tone low and serious. "I've been doing some thinking. And I think it's time we talk about the hotel." Charlie's stomach tightened at the mention of the hotel. He knew exactly where this was going. Tom had been trying to convince him to leave his job at the hotel for months now. "What about it?" "I know you don't love it there," Tom continued, his voice steady. "But you've been there for a while now. And if you want to move forward, if you want more for yourself, you've got to stop settling for less." Charlie felt the familiar sting of frustration rise in his chest. He didn't like hearing Tom talk like this. As much as he loved his brother, it always felt like Tom saw him as someone stuck in a rut. "I'm not settling for anything," Charlie replied defensively. "I like my job." Tom exhaled through his nose, his eyes narrowing. "You like the paycheck. But you're not growing, Charlie. You're not doing anything that's pushing you. You've got to stop looking at the surface and start thinking about the future." Charlie clenched his jaw, trying to control the anger bubbling up. He had heard it all before. He wasn't a kid anymore. He didn't need Tom telling him how to live his life. But Tom wasn't backing down. "You're right," Charlie said, leaning back in his seat. "I don't love the job. But it's a job. I've got bills to pay, Tom. You know how it is." Tom shook his head slowly. "It's more than just paying bills. You've got talent. I've seen it. You've got a way with people. But you're wasting it, sitting around in that hotel." Charlie took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "And what exactly do you think I should do? Leave everything behind and chase some random dream?" Tom's eyes softened, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "No, I'm saying you need to start thinking bigger. You need to start looking at the bigger picture. You're still young. You can still do something great." Charlie stared at him, unsure how to respond. There was a part of him that knew Tom was right, that he had been stuck in a cycle of mediocrity, but there was another part of him that feared taking a leap into the unknown. He had never been someone to dream big. His life had always been about surviving, about getting through the day. But now, sitting across from Tom, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that maybe there was more to life than just getting by. Just then, Charlie's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and saw the notification from the hotel app. It was from Clint Eastwood. Room 503, Clint Eastwood. Complimentary dinner voucher. Please confirm. Charlie blinked, his thoughts momentarily derailed. He hadn't expected to hear from Clint again so soon, let alone receive a dinner voucher. What's that? Tom asked, noticing his surprise. Charlie held up the phone. It's from Clint Eastwood. Apparently, he wants me to have dinner with him. Tom raised an eyebrow. Clint Eastwood? Like, the Clint Eastwood? Charlie nodded slowly. Yeah. I guess he's offering me a dinner voucher, like a peace offering or something. Tom's expression shifted to one of curiosity. Huh. That's unexpected. You're actually going to go? Charlie paused for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, why not? I'm curious. He said some things that kind of made me rethink how I see the world. Maybe it'll be good for me. Tom leaned back in the booth, a thoughtful look on his face. Well, that's definitely not a typical night. I think you should go. It could be a good chance to learn something. Charlie smirked. You, the guy who's been telling me to leave the hotel, is now telling me to go have dinner with one of the richest men in Hollywood? Tom shrugged, unbothered by the contradiction. I'm telling you to seize the opportunity. People like Clint Eastwood don't just give dinner invites to anyone. Maybe there's something more to this. Maybe he's got some advice for you. Charlie chuckled, shaking his head. I never thought I'd be sitting down to dinner with Clint Eastwood. But I guess life works in weird ways. Well, Tom said, standing up, don't blow it. This could be a chance to get some real perspective. Charlie stood as well, slipping his jacket on. I won't. Thanks, Tom. As he left the diner and headed back to the hotel, his mind was racing. There was a strange sense of anticipation in the air. This wasn't just a random dinner. This was a moment that felt like it could change everything. Whether it was advice, a new perspective, or something entirely unexpected, Charlie knew this wasn't an opportunity he could afford to miss. Charlie stood outside the grand entrance of the hotel, gazing up at its towering structure. The lights shone brightly, reflecting off the polished marble floors in the lobby. It was a typical night for the hotel, busy, bustling, and full of luxury. Yet, tonight felt different. Tonight, he was about to meet Clint Eastwood, the man whose movies had shaped an entire generation. It was an opportunity that most people would dream of, yet here Charlie was, simply trying to make sense of it all. As he entered the lobby, his heart raced. His mind kept flashing back to the conversation he had with Clint earlier. The words Clint had said about looking beyond the surface, about understanding people for who they truly were, replayed in his mind. The whole thing felt like a dream. Charlie made his way to the elevator, his steps echoing through the marble floor. He pressed the button to the top floor, where Clint's suite was located. The elevator doors closed, and as it ascended, Charlie's thoughts shifted. What would this dinner be like? What would Clint say? Would it be awkward, or would it be one of those rare moments that would change his life forever? When the elevator doors opened, Charlie stepped out and found himself facing a plush hallway lined with expensive art and silk curtains. At the end of the hall was a pair of double doors leading into Clint's suite. He walked toward them, his pulse quickening. As he knocked, a deep voice called from inside, "Come in." Charlie hesitated for a split second before turning the handle and stepping into the room. It was even grander than he had imagined, gleaming wood floors, a sweeping view of the city, and walls adorned with art from various periods of history. But what struck him the most was Clint himself, sitting in an armchair by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Charlie, good to see you," Clint said with a smile, standing up to greet him. His voice was rich, filled with years of experience and a certain calmness that seemed to settle the entire room. Despite his age, Clint still carried himself with an air of quiet authority. "Thank you for inviting me," Charlie said, unsure of what else to say. He felt a little out of place in this extravagant setting. Clint chuckled. "You were the one who got caught up in my joke earlier, right? I think I owe you a meal." Charlie smiled awkwardly. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I didn't think you'd even remember me after that. I guess I owe you an apology." "No need for that," Clint replied smoothly, gesturing for Charlie to sit. "We all have our moments. What matters is what we do afterward." Charlie took a seat at the small dining table set for two. A waiter appeared almost immediately, placing a beautifully prepared meal in front of them: steak, vegetables, and potatoes. The rich aromas filled the air, making Charlie's stomach growl. "So, what brings you to this place?" Clint asked, taking a sip of his whiskey. "What's your story, Charlie?" Charlie took a deep breath. It was a question he had heard 100 times before, but for some reason, tonight, it felt different. He wasn't just talking to some random guy. He was sitting across from a legend, a man who had lived through the highs and lows of Hollywood. Clint Eastwood wasn't just a character on the screen, he was someone who had seen life in ways that Charlie could only imagine. "I guess I'm just trying to figure things out," Charlie said slowly. "I've been working at the hotel for a while now, and sometimes, I wonder if I'm wasting my time. I feel like I'm stuck in this cycle. You know what I mean?" Clint nodded thoughtfully, his gaze unwavering. "I know exactly what you mean. When I first started in this business, I had no idea where I was going. I was just taking whatever came my way. But eventually, you start to see patterns, start to figure out what you want, what you stand for. And that's when things start to change." Charlie leaned forward, intrigued. "So, how did you figure it out? How did you get from being an actor to becoming who you are now?" Clint set down his glass and leaned back in his chair. "It wasn't just about the acting. It was about the people I met, the experiences I had, and the choices I made along the way. There were times when I thought I'd failed. There were times when I didn't think I was cut out for it. But every failure was a lesson. Every mistake pushed me closer to where I am today." Charlie nodded slowly. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at Clint's calmness, his unwavering confidence in his own journey. It was something Charlie had never felt about his own life. He had always felt like he was treading water, just trying to stay afloat. But Clint's words made him wonder if maybe he had been looking at life all wrong. "You've got to stop seeing your failures as a burden," Clint continued, his voice taking on a softer tone. "They're not there to hold you back. They're there to teach you. The problem is, most people are afraid to learn. They get stuck in their own heads, stuck in their own stories. You're no different from anyone else, Charlie. You just have to believe that you can grow." Charlie sat back in his chair, contemplating Clint's words. It was strange how easily Clint could strip away the noise in his life. For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt like he was really listening, not just to Clint's words, but to something deeper inside himself. "I've been so focused on what I don't like about my life that I've never thought about what I want to build," Charlie admitted quietly. "I've always just gotten by." Clint smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "That's the start of it, my friend. The first step is realizing that you're capable of more. Once you do that, the rest starts to fall into place." They ate in silence for a few moments, and Charlie couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The weight of his worries didn't feel so heavy anymore. For the first time, he felt like he could breathe. "So, what about you?" Charlie asked, curious. "You've lived through so much, what's the one thing you'd tell someone just starting out?" Clint took another sip of his whiskey, looking out the window as if he were reflecting on his own journey. I'd tell them to find their purpose. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. If you have something you believe in, something you're passionate about, you follow that. And never let anyone tell you it's too late. Charlie smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Maybe this dinner wasn't just about getting to know Clint Eastwood, it was about getting to know himself, too. As the night wore on, Charlie realized that this encounter was the turning point he had been waiting for. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just existing. He was thinking, reflecting, dreaming. The possibilities felt endless. After dessert, Clint stood up, offering Charlie a handshake. I'll leave you with this, don't just go through life. Make it count. Charlie shook his hand, feeling a sense of gratitude he couldn't quite put into words. I will. Thanks for everything. As he left Clint's suite, the city lights twinkling below, Charlie knew he wasn't the same person who had walked into the hotel that evening. Something had changed, and it wasn't just about the dinner. It was about the realization that he had the power to shape his own story. The night air felt cool against Charlie's skin as he stepped out of the hotel and into the city. The streets were quieter now, the rush of the day fading into the calm of the evening. His mind, however, was anything but calm. The dinner with Clint Eastwood had opened up something inside him, a space where dreams, aspirations, and possibilities began to take root. Charlie had always been someone who lived in the present, rarely looking forward, too focused on surviving to truly think about thriving. But now, after listening to Clint's words, everything seemed different. It felt like a shift had occurred within him, as if he could finally see the road ahead. Charlie took a deep breath, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. He hadn't felt this alive in a long time. The weight of his worries, his frustrations, seemed a little lighter. For the first time, he had a sense of direction. He wasn't just drifting anymore. He had a choice. As he walked through the city streets, his phone buzzed again. He pulled it out and saw another message from Tom. You good? You haven't replied to me all night. What happened with Clint? Charlie smiled to himself. He could already hear the curiosity in Tom's text. He quickly typed back. Dinner went well. Changed my perspective a lot. I'm thinking I need to make some changes. I'll fill you in tomorrow. Charlie paused for a moment before hitting send. He knew Tom would have a lot of questions, but right now, he didn't have all the answers. He needed time to process everything, to figure out what the next step was. He continued walking, each step feeling a little lighter than the last. He had never been one for grand plans, never believed that life could be something more than just getting by. But now, Clint's words had sparked something in him, a belief that maybe he could do more, be more. The next few days flew by in a blur. Charlie didn't go back to the hotel that morning. Instead, he found himself taking long walks through the city, thinking about his life, his job, his relationships. He started to realize that so much of what had held him back wasn't external. It wasn't the hotel or his job. It wasn't even his lack of connections or opportunities. It was the way he had been thinking, the way he had been playing it safe for far too long. As the days passed, Charlie knew what he had to do. He needed to stop settling. He needed to stop waiting for life to give him what he wanted and start going after it. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let fear keep him from pursuing something bigger. On the 5th day after his dinner with Clint, Charlie decided it was time. He had thought it through, and he was ready to take the plunge. He showed up at the hotel early in the morning, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't had in years. When he walked through the lobby, he felt the eyes of the staff on him. For the first time, he wasn't just a part of the background. He felt like he was someone who was about to make a change. He approached Tom, who was busy at the front desk. Tom looked up and smiled when he saw him. Well, look who finally showed up. You okay? Charlie didn't hesitate. I'm good. Better than good, actually. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Tom raised an eyebrow. About? Charlie took a deep breath. I'm going to quit the hotel. I'm going to pursue something bigger. I'm not sure what yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Tom stared at him for a moment, then broke into a wide grin. About time, man. I knew you had it in you. Charlie smiled back, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt right. For the first time, he was taking control of his own destiny. I'm going to need your help, though. I've got no idea what comes next. Tom nodded. You've got my support, always. But just know this, you're not alone in this. You've got a lot of people in your corner. Charlie nodded, feeling grateful for his brother's support. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. The decision was made. Charlie wasn't going to wait anymore. He wasn't going to stay stuck in a job that didn't inspire him. He was going to step out into the unknown and chase after something greater, something that lit a fire inside him. He didn't know what that something was yet, but he knew he was capable of finding it. As Charlie left the hotel that day, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just walking through life anymore, he was moving forward, actively choosing his path. He didn't know exactly where he was headed, but he knew that, whatever came next, he was ready for it. Charlie woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his window, the early morning light streaming through the blinds. He had spent most of the night thinking about the decision he had made. The weight of it had settled over him like a blanket, comforting yet full of uncertainty. It was one thing to talk about change, to acknowledge the need for something bigger, but it was another thing entirely to actually make that leap. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, and looked around his small apartment. Everything about it felt different now. The walls, which once seemed so familiar, now felt like they were closing in on him. It was as if he had outgrown this place, this life. But that was part of it, wasn't it? Change wasn't just about doing something new, it was about leaving behind what no longer served you. Charlie stood up, stretched, and walked over to the window. He looked out at the city, the hustle and bustle of it all. It was like watching the world move in fast forward while he was standing still. But that was about to change. He had made a choice, and now it was time to see it through. He reached for his phone on the nightstand and typed a quick message to Tom. I'm doing it today. I'm putting in my notice. He hesitated for a moment before hitting send, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear in his stomach. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain, he was no longer willing to wait for life to give him an opportunity. He was going to create his own. When Charlie arrived at the hotel that morning, he felt like he was stepping into a different world. The lobby, the employees, the guests, they all seemed so disconnected from the decision he had made. To them, it was just another day, just another routine. But to him, this was the beginning of something new. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the manager's office. He knocked lightly on the door before entering. The manager, Linda, looked up from her desk, a bit surprised to see him. Charlie, is everything okay? She asked, her tone polite but curious. Charlie took a deep breath and smiled. Actually, no, Linda. I need to talk to you. Linda set down her pen, sensing that something was different about this conversation. Sure, what's going on? I'm putting in my notice, Charlie said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. I've decided to move on from the hotel. Linda raised an eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and understanding crossing her face. I see. That's unexpected. Can I ask what's behind the decision? Charlie paused for a moment, unsure of how to put it into words. But then he remembered Clint's advice, the need to look beyond the surface. So he said what was in his heart. I've realized that I've been stuck here for too long, doing something that doesn't challenge me. I've been waiting for something to change, but I finally understand that if I want something different, I have to take action myself. I need to step out and find what really inspires me. I can't keep going through the motions. Linda stared at him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Well, Charlie, I can't say I'm not disappointed. You've been a great part of this team. But I understand the need to grow. If this is what's best for you, then I support it. Charlie smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It felt strange, almost surreal, to have made the decision. But it also felt incredibly freeing. He had finally chosen to move forward, and no one could take that from him. I appreciate that, Linda. I'll do everything I can to make this transition smooth. I'm grateful for the time I've spent here. Linda stood up, offering a handshake. I wish you the best, Charlie. You'll do great things, I'm sure of it. As Charlie walked out of the hotel that day, he felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. There was a part of him that was terrified. He had no concrete plan, no clear path ahead. But he also felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. This was his moment to take control. The fear that had once paralyzed him now seemed more like fuel, propelling him forward. He didn't know where he was going next, but he knew he couldn't stay where he was. He had learned from Clint that life wasn't about waiting for things to happen, it was about taking action. Charlie decided to take the rest of the day to clear his head. He walked through the city, letting his mind wander, trying to find inspiration in the hustle of daily life. He passed by coffee shops, bookstores, and galleries. He even stopped at a local park, sitting on a bench and watching people pass by. It was in these quiet moments that he began to realize something: it didn't matter where he started. What mattered was that he had the courage to start at all. By the time the sun began to set, Charlie had an idea of what he wanted to do next. It wasn't a fully formed plan, but it was a direction. He would take his skills, his experience, and his desire for something more, and he would build something new, something that felt right to him. He would start small, but he would keep moving forward. That night, as Charlie sat down to dinner, he sent another message to Tom. I did it. I'm free. Now, it's time to figure out what's next. Charlie smiled at the message. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Charlie's decision to leave the hotel had sparked a fire within him, but the road ahead was far from clear. As the days turned into weeks, he found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. There was excitement, of course, a rush that came from having made such a bold decision. But there was also a sense of unease. Leaving the comfort of the hotel, the job he'd known for years, was a huge risk. He didn't have a backup plan. He wasn't sure what he was going to do next. Still, every time he thought about returning to the hotel, to the life he had left behind, he couldn't do it. The thought of staying stagnant, of remaining in the same cycle, was unbearable. So, he pushed forward, one uncertain step after another. One morning, as Charlie sipped his coffee, he noticed a notification on his phone. It was from Tom. Hey, have you thought about what you're going to do next? You can't just sit around forever, man. We need to figure this out. Charlie stared at the message for a moment. Tom was right. He couldn't sit around forever, waiting for inspiration to strike. He needed to take action. That afternoon, Charlie sat down at his kitchen table and pulled out a notebook. He had never been one for detailed plans, but something told him that now was the time to start thinking about the future, even if it was just a vague direction. He wrote down everything that came to mind, things he enjoyed, skills he had, dreams he had forgotten about. Writing everything down felt like a small victory. It gave him a sense of control, even though the next steps were still unclear. One of the things that had always interested Charlie was the idea of entrepreneurship. He had seen people around him start their own businesses, build something from the ground up, and achieve the kind of success he had only dreamed about. He had the energy and the drive, but he didn't know where to start. Maybe this is my chance, he whispered to himself. He took out his phone and began searching for small business ideas. He looked into everything from online businesses to local ventures, trying to find something that felt right. After a few hours of research, he was exhausted, but he had a few ideas. Nothing concrete, but at least something to work with. That evening, he met up with Tom at their usual spot, a small diner that had been their go-to place since they were teenagers. The waitress, an older woman with a warm smile, greeted them like old friends. They sat in their usual booth, the one by the window, where they could watch the world go by. "You look deep in thought," Tom said, taking a sip of his soda. "What's going on?" Charlie leaned back in the booth, rubbing his chin. "I'm thinking about starting my own business," he said slowly, as if the words were still sinking in. Tom raised an eyebrow. "A business? Like what?" Charlie shrugged. "I'm not entirely sure yet. But I've been looking into it, and I think it's time. It's not going to be easy, but I don't want to keep working for someone else. I want to create something." Tom stared at him for a moment, then broke into a grin. "Man, I think you finally lost it." He laughed, but Charlie could see the genuine excitement in his eyes. "No, seriously, I think it's awesome. But you know this is going to take a lot of work, right? It's not all rainbows and butterflies. You've got to be prepared to fail before you succeed." Charlie nodded, his mind racing. "I know. But I can't just sit around anymore. I've been waiting for a sign, for something to fall into my lap, but nothing is going to change if I don't make it happen myself." Tom smiled, raising his glass. "I like that. All right, man, I'm all in. Whatever you need, you know I'm here to help." Charlie felt a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. He had Tom's support, and that meant everything. As the conversation shifted to other topics, Charlie felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be tough, but he was ready for it. He had taken the first step by leaving the hotel, and now, he was ready to take the second step, starting his own business. The next few weeks were a blur of research, planning, and soul-searching. Charlie began to immerse himself in everything business-related. He took courses online, read books, and connected with people who had been down this road before. Every day, he felt a little bit more equipped to tackle the challenge ahead. But no matter how much he learned, the fear of failure still lingered in the back of his mind. It wasn't the kind of fear that paralyzed him, but it was there, a constant reminder that this journey wasn't going to be easy. One afternoon, Charlie decided to visit a local cafe to clear his mind. As he walked through the door, the bell above it jingled, and he was greeted by the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee. He sat at a table by the window, watching people go about their day. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Clint Eastwood. "Hey Charlie, just wanted to check in. How's the journey going?" Charlie's heart skipped a beat. Clint had taken the time to reach out to him. He smiled, typing out a reply. "It's going, Clint. It's been a little overwhelming, but I'm figuring it out. Just trying to stay focused." "Good. Remember, the road to success is long, but you've got what it takes. Don't let fear hold you back. You've already made the hard choice, now just take it one step at a time." Charlie felt a surge of gratitude. Clint's words were exactly what he needed to hear. He had already taken the leap. Now it was time to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The days that followed Charlie's decision to start his own business were both exhilarating and overwhelming. He had never felt such a mix of excitement and fear at the same time. He had taken the leap, but now came the hard part, actually making it work. For the first few weeks, Charlie immersed himself in every aspect of entrepreneurship. He researched online businesses, brick-and-mortar models, and everything in between. He took courses, watched countless webinars, and read articles until his eyes blurred. Every free moment he had was spent learning, planning, and imagining what his business could be. It wasn't just about starting something new, it was about creating a future for himself, something that mattered. Charlie's vision slowly began to form. He knew he wanted to build something that aligned with his interests, something that would bring people together. The idea of creating a unique space, a place where people could relax, connect, and find inspiration, started to take root. But he also knew he had to be practical. He needed a business plan, a strategy, and a clear understanding of what would set his venture apart. One evening, Charlie sat down with his laptop, determined to map out his ideas. He had a notebook filled with scribbles, sketches, and half-formed concepts, but now he needed to bring them to life in a way that made sense. He knew he couldn't do it alone, and that's when he thought of Tom. Tom had always been the practical one, the one who had a knack for numbers and logistics. Charlie might have the passion, but Tom had the skills that could turn his dream into reality. After a quick phone call, they agreed to meet the next morning to discuss the next steps. The diner where they met was the same place they'd gone to for years. As usual, Tom arrived first, already sipping on a cup of coffee and scribbling notes in his notepad. When Charlie sat down across from him, Tom looked up with a grin. "Ready to get to work?" Tom asked, his voice cheerful but serious. Charlie smiled back. "Ready as I'll ever be." They spent the next few hours going over ideas, brainstorming, and putting together a rough outline of the business. Tom had a way of breaking down complex ideas into manageable steps, and it was exactly what Charlie needed. The two of them worked late into the afternoon, and by the end of it, they had a solid foundation. Charlie's vision was taking shape, a cozy cafe-style space with a twist. He wanted to create a hub for creativity, a place where people could come to work, relax, or simply find inspiration. But it wasn't just about coffee or food. It was about the experience. The ambience, the community, and the connections people could make. Tom helped Charlie sort through the financials. They discussed everything from the initial investment to projected profits. It was clear that this was going to be a long-term commitment, and there were a lot of details to work out. But it didn't scare Charlie. He was more focused than he had ever been. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Charlie and Tom found a location that felt perfect, a cozy, slightly run-down building on the edge of town that had tons of potential. It was the kind of place that needed a little TLC, but once it was polished up, it could be something special. The rent was affordable, and the location had the kind of foot traffic they needed. Charlie spent every waking moment planning. He drew up designs for the interior, thinking about everything from the furniture to the lighting. He wanted it to feel like a home away from home, somewhere people could escape to. At the same time, Tom worked on securing the necessary licenses, figuring out the logistics of the business, and making sure they were on track financially. Charlie was amazed at how quickly things were moving. It felt like a dream, but it was also terrifying. Every step forward felt like it came with 100 new questions. There were moments when Charlie doubted himself. Was he really cut out for this? Would people even care about his idea? Would it succeed or fail? The fear was always there, lingering in the back of his mind. But every time he felt that panic rising, he reminded himself of Clint's words, "The road to success is long, but you've got what it takes." It wasn't long before the renovation process began. Charlie and Tom spent hours at the building, overseeing the work and making sure everything was coming together just as they'd imagined. They hired a few people to help with the construction and design, but Charlie was hands-on with every detail. He knew that if this business was going to be a reflection of who he was, it needed to feel personal. As the days passed, the building started to take shape. The old hardwood floors were restored, the walls were painted a warm, inviting color, and the cafe counter was installed. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in months, Charlie felt a sense of accomplishment. One afternoon, Clint called Charlie again. He had been checking in on him every few weeks, offering advice and encouragement. This time, Clint's voice was different, there was something almost urgent about it. "Charlie, how's the project going?" Clint asked. "It's coming together," Charlie replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "The place is looking great. We're getting closer every day." Clint was quiet for a moment. "Listen to me, kid. When you open this place, it's going to be a lot harder than you think. There will be days when you wonder if it was all worth it. But you've got to stay in it. Stay the course. Success doesn't come overnight." Charlie felt a lump form in his throat. "I know. I'm just worried, you know. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not enough?" Clint's voice softened. "You're more than enough, Charlie. You've already taken the hardest step. You've put yourself out there. Now it's about pushing through when things get tough. Don't back down." Charlie nodded, even though Clint couldn't see him. It was just the reminder he needed. He wasn't alone in this. He had people who believed in him, and that made all the difference. The weeks passed, and the grand opening of the cafe was fast approaching. The excitement was building, but so was the pressure. Charlie had no idea what the future held, but he had come too far to turn back now. He took a deep breath as he stood in front of the newly completed space, ready to open the doors to the world. The cafe wasn't just a place for coffee, it was a dream, a vision that had taken months to bring to life. As he stood there, looking at the space he had worked so hard to create, Charlie knew that no matter what happened next, he had done something incredible. He had taken the leap. And now, there was no turning back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The day had finally arrived. Charlie stood in front of the cafe, taking in the sight of the newly painted sign above the door, the Hive Cafe. His heart was racing as he looked around at the freshly renovated space. The once dilapidated building had been transformed into a vibrant, welcoming environment, just as he'd envisioned. The warm glow of the lights spilling from the windows, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, and the cozy, eclectic decor all came together in perfect harmony. It felt like more than just a business. It felt like home. But as Charlie stood outside the cafe, staring at the crowds gathering, the familiar weight of doubt began to creep in. Was this really going to work? Would people like the place? He had poured his heart and soul into every detail, but the reality of the moment was overwhelming. The fear of failure was no longer just a nagging thought, it was a heavy presence pressing down on him. "Hey, you alright?" Tom's voice broke through his thoughts. Charlie turned to see his friend standing beside him, looking every bit as nervous as he felt. Tom was holding a clipboard, clearly ready to go over last-minute details. Charlie nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just a little nervous, you know." Tom grinned. "That's normal. I'm pretty sure I'm feeling worse than you. But hey, this is the moment, right? We've worked hard for this. It's going to be great." Charlie took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Right. We've worked so hard for this. It's time to see if people like it." As the clock ticked closer to the grand opening, Charlie's nerves began to calm, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. The first customers started trickling in, some curious passers-by, others who had seen the cafe's social media buzz. The moment of truth had arrived. Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing with energy. The cafe was filled with the sound of clinking mugs, laughter, and the faint hum of conversations. Charlie stood behind the counter, serving coffee, greeting people, and taking it all in. He couldn't believe it, this was really happening. As the day wore on, Charlie began to realize that his fears had been unfounded. People loved the cafe. They loved the cozy ambience, the creative vibe, and of course, the coffee. Word of mouth spread quickly, and before long, the place was filled to capacity. Customers sat at tables, typing on laptops or chatting with friends, and the atmosphere was exactly what Charlie had dreamed of, a place where people could come together and be inspired. It wasn't without its hiccups, of course. There were moments when the cafe was understaffed, and the line for coffee seemed never-ending. But Charlie and Tom worked together, keeping things running smoothly. They had a team of employees who were friendly, attentive, and just as passionate about the cafe's mission as they were. In the midst of all the excitement, Charlie's phone buzzed. He pulled it out of his pocket and saw a message from Clint. "How's it going, Charlie? I hope the opening is a success. Remember, the first day is just the beginning. Keep your head down, keep learning, and keep improving." Charlie smiled and quickly typed back. "It's going better than I expected. Thanks for the advice, Clint. You were right, this is just the start." As the evening approached, the cafe began to quiet down. The last few customers lingered, finishing their drinks and chatting about their day. Charlie leaned against the counter, taking a moment to breathe and process everything that had happened. His heart was still racing, but in a different way now. This was the feeling of success. "You did it, man," Tom said, slapping him on the back. Charlie chuckled, looking around at the bustling cafe. "We did it, Tom. This is only the beginning." Over the next few weeks, the cafe continued to thrive. The initial excitement had died down a bit, but the steady stream of customers never stopped. The regulars began to form, and Charlie got to know their names, their orders, and their stories. He felt more connected to the community than he had in years. It was fulfilling in a way he hadn't anticipated. But even as things were going well, Charlie knew he couldn't afford to become complacent. He and Tom spent hours tweaking the menu, refining their branding, and brainstorming new ways to attract more customers. Charlie kept his eye on the bigger picture, constantly seeking out ways to improve. One afternoon, as Charlie was preparing drinks behind the counter, a familiar face walked into the cafe. He froze for a moment, recognizing the person immediately. It was Clint. "Clint!" Charlie exclaimed, wiping his hands on his apron and walking over to greet him. "I didn't know you were in town." Clint smiled and extended his hand. "I thought I'd come check out your place. Looks like it's doing well." Charlie grinned. "It's been great. A little overwhelming at times, but it's definitely been worth it." They sat down at a table near the window, and Charlie took a seat across from Clint. The cafe was quiet at this time of day, just a few customers sipping coffee and reading books. "You've come a long way," Clint said, his tone serious. "I'm proud of you, kid. You took the leap, and now you've got something real." Charlie's chest swelled with pride, but he could feel the weight of the journey. "I couldn't have done it without your advice, Clint. Seriously. I've had moments when I wanted to give up. But you kept me going." Clint waved it off. "You had it in you all along, Charlie. I just reminded you of that. The real work starts now. You've built something, but you've got to keep it going. Keep evolving, keep improving. The world changes fast, and so must you." Charlie nodded. "I get it. I'm ready." Clint smiled. "Good. Because this is just the beginning. You've got a long road ahead, but I believe you can do it." The conversation with Clint stayed with Charlie long after he left. He knew that starting a business was a marathon, not a sprint. He had made it this far, but there was so much more to learn and so many more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, Charlie wasn't afraid of the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready for whatever came next. A few months after the grand opening, Charlie found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The Hive Cafe had become a staple in the community. It was the place people went to catch up with friends, hold business meetings, or simply escape for a few quiet hours. The buzz around town had only grown, and Charlie was gaining a reputation for creating a unique space. But with success came new challenges, challenges Charlie had not anticipated. It started with the staff. At first, everything had gone smoothly. The team was small, just a handful of baristas and waitstaff, all of whom shared Charlie's passion for creating a welcoming environment. But as the cafe grew in popularity, so did the demands. The team had expanded, but with the expansion came tension. Charlie was the kind of boss who wanted to be involved in every part of the business. He was hands-on, always in the trenches with his employees, working alongside them. But this approach started to take a toll. The pressures of running the cafe, combined with his desire to keep things personal, led to some growing pains. One morning, as Charlie was preparing for the rush, he noticed one of his baristas, Lisa, standing by the counter, her arms crossed, looking tense. "Hey, everything all right?" Charlie asked, walking over to her. Lisa looked at him with a tight smile. "I just don't know how we're going to handle this many people coming through the door. I mean, we're barely keeping up as it is. We're getting slammed." Charlie nodded, knowing she had a point. The cafe had become busier than ever, and the small team wasn't enough to meet the demand. But he had been reluctant to hire more people, fearing the added expense. "We're working on it," Charlie said. "I'm going to bring in a few more staff soon, but I want to make sure we find the right people, you know." Lisa gave him a look, one that was part frustration, part concern. "I know you want to keep it small, Charlie, but this place is blowing up. You can't do it all yourself. You need help." Charlie didn't know how to respond. He hated the thought of delegating more, but Lisa was right. There were only so many hours in the day, and he couldn't keep up with everything. The staff issue wasn't the only challenge Charlie was facing. As the cafe's popularity grew, so did the competition. A new cafe had opened up just a few blocks away, and it wasn't long before rumors started to swirl. The other cafe had a sleek, modern design, and their marketing was polished. Charlie had poured so much of his heart into the Hive, but now he was starting to feel the pressure to keep up. One afternoon, as Charlie sat at a table with Tom, they discussed the new competition. "What do you think?" Tom asked, sipping his coffee. "Are you worried about the other place?" Charlie looked out the window, his mind racing. "Honestly? Yeah, a little. I mean, they've got that fancy vibe going, and people seem to love it. It's hard to compete with that." Tom frowned. "But that's the thing, Charlie. You don't need to compete with them. You've got something special here. The Hive isn't just about the coffee, it's the experience. It's the community. You're offering something they can't." Charlie ran a hand through his hair, still unsure. "It's not just the vibe. They've got a bigger budget, more resources. I don't know if we can keep up with them in terms of marketing or fancy upgrades." Tom leaned forward. "You don't need to keep up with them. You just need to stay true to what you've built. People love the Hive because it's authentic. It's real. It's not trying to be anything it's not. That's your edge." Charlie nodded slowly, the weight of Tom's words sinking in. He had built something that was different from the trendy coffee shops popping up all over town. But was it enough to keep the business thriving in such a competitive market? A few weeks later, the pressure finally caught up with Charlie. He had been juggling the increasing demands of the business with the struggles of managing staff, dealing with the competition, and trying to stay true to his original vision. One evening, after closing time, Charlie sat alone in the cafe, staring at the empty chairs and the dim lights. The cafe had been packed all day, and Charlie was physically and emotionally exhausted. He had barely slept the night before and had spent the day putting out fires, answering customer complaints, mediating staff disputes, and trying to keep things running smoothly. "Why did I think I could do this?" he muttered to himself. "This was supposed to be my dream, but now it feels like I'm drowning." Just as he was about to get lost in his thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Clint. "I know you're facing some challenges right now. Trust me, that's just part of the process. But don't give up. You've built something good. Keep going. You've got this. Charlie smiled faintly as he read the message. He had learned so much from Clint over the past year, and yet it seemed that every time things got difficult, Clint's words were exactly what he needed to hear. The next morning, Charlie woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He still had a long way to go, but he couldn't give up. He had come too far to throw in the towel now. He immediately called a meeting with his staff. It was time to address the challenges head-on. When Charlie stood in front of the team that afternoon, he was honest about the struggles they were facing. "I know things have been tough recently," he began, his voice steady but firm. "But we've got something special here, and we're not going to let anyone take that from us. I know we've got the potential to make the Hive something even bigger than it already is. But we need to work together." The staff nodded, listening intently. Charlie could see the tiredness in their eyes, but also the determination. They believed in the cafe just as much as he did. "We're going to bring in more help," Charlie said, "and we're going to focus on what makes us unique. We're not trying to compete with the new cafe down the street. We're going to keep doing what we do best, creating a space where people feel welcome, where they can come and escape. And we're going to make sure that every person who walks through that door feels like they're part of something special." There was a collective nod of agreement from the team. Charlie could feel the energy shift in the room. He wasn't alone in this fight. They were all in it together. As the weeks went by, Charlie and his team implemented new ideas, new staff members, and new ways to improve the customer experience. They didn't try to be like the other cafe, they focused on what made the Hive unique. The results weren't immediate, but slowly, they started to see the changes paying off. Customers returned, and new faces began walking through the door. The competition was still there, but Charlie realized something important: the Hive didn't need to be the biggest or the flashiest cafe in town. It just needed to be true to itself. And as long as they stayed true to their mission, Charlie knew that success would follow. The following months brought a blend of highs and lows for Charlie and the Hive Cafe. Despite their efforts to improve and adapt, competition remained fierce. Other businesses were opening, offering trendy alternatives, and some customers began to trickle away to try the newest thing in town. But Charlie refused to let the cafe slip into obscurity. Every challenge, every bump in the road, was a lesson that taught him more about perseverance. One rainy Thursday morning, Charlie sat behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. It was quieter than usual, and the sound of raindrops tapping against the window provided a calming backdrop to his otherwise chaotic thoughts. The staff was getting frustrated, some of them considering other job opportunities. Charlie could feel the stress building, but he also knew this was a make-or-break moment. Then, just as he was starting to sink into self-doubt, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Clint. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. "I know you're going through a rough patch right now. But you've got to believe in yourself. You've built something great. Focus on what makes you different. What's your vision? Stick to it, and things will turn around." Clint's words were exactly what Charlie needed to hear. He put the phone down, stood up, and walked out to the cafe floor. There were customers to serve, staff to manage, and decisions to make. Charlie had a vision, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. By the following weekend, Charlie had implemented a major change. He had long known that the key to the Hive Cafe's identity was its sense of community. They weren't just another coffee shop, they were a gathering place. Inspired by Clint's advice, Charlie decided to take the idea of community one step further. He called a team meeting that afternoon. "All right, guys," Charlie began, addressing the staff. "I've been thinking a lot about what makes us unique. We've got great coffee, great service, and a great atmosphere, but we need to create more than just a place for people to grab their coffee. We need to create something that people want to be a part of." Tom, his right-hand man, chimed in. "What are you thinking?" I think we should start hosting events, art shows, live music, community meetups. We've got a beautiful space here, and we can do more with it. Let's bring people together in a way the other cafes can't. There was a murmur of agreement around the table. Lisa, the barista who had been with the Hive from the beginning, looked up with a smile. I like that. We've got a lot of talented people who come in here. It could be a great way to showcase local talent and bring in new customers. Charlie nodded. Exactly. We want to create an experience, not just serve coffee. We'll host an art exhibit next weekend. We'll make it a big deal. Music, food, coffee, and local artists all in one place. The idea was met with enthusiasm. For the first time in a while, Charlie felt the spark of excitement again. The cafe wasn't just about coffee anymore, it was about building something bigger, something that people could connect with. The art exhibit was a huge success. The walls of the cafe were adorned with paintings and photography from local artists. The space was transformed into a vibrant gallery, filled with guests admiring the artwork and sipping on lattes. Local musicians performed live, filling the air with soothing acoustic melodies. The atmosphere was electric, and people were smiling, laughing, and talking to each other. The sense of community Charlie had always wanted for the Hive was alive and thriving. Charlie walked through the crowd, soaking in the energy. He caught glimpses of old and new customers, chatting with each other, sharing stories, and exchanging ideas. This wasn't just a cafe anymore, it was a place where people could connect, create, and be inspired. At the end of the night, Charlie stood outside the Hive, his heart swelling with pride. People had responded to the event in a way he hadn't expected. They were talking about it on social media, sharing photos, and raving about the atmosphere. For the first time in a long while, Charlie felt like he had found his stride again. In the weeks that followed, the Hive continued to host events, open mic nights, book clubs, charity fundraisers, and more. The cafe became a hub for local culture and creativity. People from all walks of life came to the Hive not just for a cup of coffee, but for the sense of belonging it offered. Charlie's vision was slowly but surely taking shape. But even as things started to look brighter, there was still a lingering challenge in the back of Charlie's mind: the competition. The new cafe down the street had been steadily gaining traction, and Charlie knew that despite their successes, they were still in a battle for the hearts and wallets of their customers. One day, as Charlie was closing up for the night, Tom came up to him with an idea. "I've been thinking," Tom said, "we should do something big to really stand out. Something that no one else is doing. If we're going to compete, we've got to make a bold statement." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Tom's eyes lit up. "What if we offered something completely unique, like a coffee subscription service? A membership where people get exclusive access to special blends, discounts, and invites to VIP events." Charlie leaned against the counter, considering the idea. "A subscription service, huh? That's interesting. But will people bite?" Tom grinned. "I think so. People love exclusivity. Plus, we already have a loyal following. This could take it to the next level." Charlie thought about it for a moment longer. He wasn't one to take big risks lightly, but he also knew that playing it safe wasn't going to get them ahead of the competition. "All right," Charlie said finally. "Let's do it. Let's make it exclusive. Let's give our regulars something special to look forward to." A month later, Charlie launched the subscription service, and the response was immediate. Customers signed up quickly, eager to be part of something special. The idea resonated with them. Not only did they get premium coffee blends delivered to their door, but they also got access to exclusive events and behind-the-scenes content. It was an instant hit. With this new offering, Charlie felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Hive Cafe wasn't just about staying afloat, it was about staying ahead of the curve, evolving with the times, and creating something people couldn't find anywhere else. And as the cafe continued to grow, so did Charlie's confidence. He had weathered the storm of doubt, competition, and fear. But now, he was on solid ground again, and he was more determined than ever to see his vision through. As the months rolled on, the Hive Cafe continued to thrive, becoming a staple in the community. Charlie had built something special, something that was about more than just coffee. It was a haven for artists, a gathering space for neighbors, and a warm, welcoming environment for anyone who needed it. But with the cafe's success came new problems Charlie hadn't anticipated when he first opened the doors. Charlie was sitting at a table near the front of the cafe one Wednesday afternoon, reviewing inventory reports, when he noticed something strange. A group of regulars, who had been visiting every day for the past few months, hadn't shown up for a while. He didn't think much of it at first, assuming maybe they were just busy or had found a new routine. But as the days passed, more and more familiar faces stopped coming in. Customers he had built friendships with over the past year were noticeably absent. The cafe was still busy, but it was missing that same energy, the feeling that it was the place to be in town. Charlie's mind raced. What was going on? He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, after closing, Charlie decided to walk down to the new cafe that had been causing him concern for months. The one that had been steadily gaining traction, the one with the sleek design and polished marketing. He wanted to see for himself what was going on. The cafe, called Urban Grind, was busier than usual. People were lined up outside, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Charlie stood across the street for a few moments, watching. He had always known it was a competitor, but now, it seemed like it was more than just that. It felt like they were pulling away his customers, bit by bit. He felt a tight knot in his chest. Was this the end of the Hive? Charlie wasn't a man to back down easily, but he also knew that businesses, especially in such a tight-knit community, had to be adaptable. He had to figure out what was happening before it was too late. The next day, Charlie ran into one of his regulars, Amanda, who had been a frequent visitor since the early days of the Hive. She was always one of the first to greet him with a smile, but today, her face was troubled. "Hey, Amanda. Everything okay?" Charlie asked as he prepared her usual caramel macchiato. Amanda hesitated before speaking, her voice softer than usual. "Actually, Charlie, there's something I've been meaning to say. I've been coming to the Hive for a while now, and I love what you've built here. But, well, some of the people I know have been going to Urban Grind lately. I don't know, it just seems like they've got all this new stuff that feels a little, I don't know, fancier." Charlie felt a pang in his chest. "Fancier?" "Yeah," Amanda continued. "They've got these new drinks, this cool atmosphere, and their events are all so upscale. It's hard to compete with that." Charlie forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. "I get it. Everyone's looking for something new. I appreciate you telling me, though. It helps me understand what's going on." Amanda gave him a sympathetic look. "Don't get me wrong, Charlie. The Hive will always be special to me. It's just, there's a lot of options out there now." Charlie nodded, trying to mask his growing sense of unease. "Thanks, Amanda. I'll keep that in mind." That night, Charlie couldn't sleep. Amanda's words echoed in his mind as he tossed and turned in bed. "It's just fancier," she had said. The thought lingered. What was it about Urban Grind that people were gravitating toward? Was it the design? The exclusivity? The newer menu items? Charlie got up, grabbed his laptop, and began researching. He dug into Urban Grind's website, looking at their menu, social media posts, and marketing tactics. There it was, everything about their branding screamed modern, sleek, and sophisticated. From the carefully curated Instagram photos to the pristine interiors and artisan offerings, Urban Grind was everything that Charlie's Cafe was not. It was shiny and polished, and to be honest, it was beginning to outshine the Hive in the eyes of some of his customers. He closed his laptop with a sigh. What had started as a small, charming cafe filled with personality was now being overshadowed by the gloss and allure of something new. It wasn't just about the coffee anymore, it was about image, status, and an experience that felt exclusive. Charlie had always focused on the heart of the Hive, but now it seemed like he needed to consider how to compete with that. The next day, Charlie decided to have a conversation with Tom. He knew he couldn't do this alone, and Tom had been by his side since the beginning. If anyone could help him figure this out, it was him. They sat down in the back office, the weight of the moment not lost on either of them. "Tom, I'm worried. Have you noticed the shift lately? More and more people seem to be going to urban grind instead of the Hive." Tom leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "Yeah, I've noticed. But, it's not just about the fancy drinks or the trendy vibe. I think it's the perception that people are looking for something new, something fresh. It's a phase that'll pass." Charlie rubbed his temples, feeling the tension building in his neck. "I don't know, Tom. The last thing I want is for the Hive to feel irrelevant. We've worked so hard for this, but I'm starting to feel like it's slipping away." Tom stood up and placed a hand on Charlie's shoulder. "You've got to trust yourself, Charlie. You've created something that's special. Maybe it's time for a fresh direction, though. You've built a brand based on authenticity, community, and personal connection. Those are things urban grind doesn't have. Let's focus on what makes us different." Charlie stared at him, the words sinking in. "You're right," Charlie said slowly. "We've always had that personal touch, that connection with people. Maybe it's time to take it to the next level." Over the next few days, Charlie brainstormed with his team, figuring out how to adjust their approach without losing the heart of what the Hive was about. They started planning new events, ones that would continue to build community, but also give them that extra edge. They worked on revamping the menu, adding unique items that felt exclusive to the Hive, but still maintained their personal touch. And then, Charlie had an idea: what if they introduced a members-only experience? Something that would give loyal customers access to unique benefits, but still keep it grounded in what made the Hive special. It wasn't going to be an easy road ahead, but Charlie knew one thing for sure: the Hive wasn't just a business. It was a community, a family. And as long as he had that, he had something money couldn't buy. The weeks that followed Charlie's decision to redefine the Hive Cafe were some of the most challenging, and rewarding, of his career. The team had worked tirelessly to implement new ideas, fresh concepts, and innovative events that would set them apart from the competition. The changes were subtle, but the effects were undeniable. The Hive wasn't just a cafe anymore, it was becoming a cultural hub, a place where people gathered, exchanged ideas, and experienced something special. But despite all their efforts, the tension between the Hive and urban grind was growing. It wasn't just about coffee anymore. It was about who could own the heart of the town. Charlie knew that to win back the customers who drifted away, they had to show that the Hive was more than just a place to drink a cup of coffee. It was a community, a lifestyle, and a sanctuary from the increasingly impersonal, fast-paced world. One afternoon, just as Charlie was about to leave for a meeting with Tom about upcoming events, a message appeared on his phone. It was a notification from a popular local food critic, Megan Reese, whose reviews had a reputation for making or breaking a restaurant in the area. Charlie's heart skipped a beat. Megan had posted something new about urban grind. With a deep breath, he clicked on the post. The caption read, "A hidden gem in the heart of the city, urban grind has become the go-to spot for those looking for the ultimate coffee experience." Modern, sleek, and with a menu that's worth every penny, it's easy to see why this cafe has been dominating the coffee scene lately. If you haven't been, you're missing out. Charlie felt his stomach tighten. The message was clear: urban grind had successfully captured the attention of the masses. Their polished, high-end image was paying off. And now, They were getting the validation they needed to cement their place as the top choice in town. But it wasn't just that. Megan's post included a line about how Urban Grind was hosting an exclusive event the following weekend, an art exhibit, music performance, and coffee tasting experience, all packaged together in an upscale, invitation-only affair. It was exactly the type of event Charlie had just started organizing at the Hive, but now Urban Grind was offering it with a level of luxury that felt out of his reach. Charlie stared at the screen, his mind racing. He knew that if Urban Grind was getting all the attention for hosting events like that, it would only pull more people away from the Hive. Charlie sat down at the table, rubbing his face. It felt like they were being overshadowed at every turn. Despite everything they had worked for, everything they had built, was it all going to be overshadowed by the shiny new competitor down the street? Tom walked into the office, sensing the tension in the room. He had been Charlie's right-hand man from the start, always calm under pressure. "You all right, man?" he asked, taking a seat across from Charlie. Charlie showed him the food critic's post. "This is bad, Tom. It's like we're fighting a losing battle. They're doing everything we're doing, but better. They've got the crowd, the reviews, and now the exclusive events." Tom nodded, reading the post with a furrowed brow. "I see what you're saying. But Charlie, we've always had something they don't." Charlie leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "And what's that?" "Because right now, it feels like we've got nothing but a handful of loyal customers who are slowly drifting away." "We've got heart," Tom said, looking Charlie directly in the eye. "We're not just selling coffee, Charlie. We're selling connection. We're selling authenticity. People come to the Hive because they feel like they belong. Urban Grind may have the shiny exterior, but we've got something more important. We've got soul." Charlie felt the weight of Tom's words. He knew Tom was right. The Hive wasn't just a business, it was a place that people loved because it had meaning. It had soul. That night, Charlie stayed up late, poring over his notes. He wasn't going to let Urban Grind take everything they had built. He needed to take a step back and remember what the Hive stood for. It wasn't about being the flashiest or the most exclusive, it was about being real, being a part of the community, and offering an experience that couldn't be replicated. Then it hit him. He had the perfect idea to turn things around. It was bold, it was risky, but it was something that only the Hive could pull off. The next morning, Charlie gathered his team for a meeting. "All right, guys, I've been thinking a lot. We've worked so hard to make the Hive a unique place, but I think we need to raise the stakes. We can't compete with Urban Grind by trying to be more like them. We need to go all in on what makes us different. And what makes us different is our community." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "We're going to launch a community-driven campaign. We're going to host a free event for the entire town, something that brings everyone together. No entry fees, no fancy invites, just a true celebration of what the Hive is all about, the people. We'll have local music, art from local creators, free coffee, and a chance for everyone to be a part of this community. No exclusivity, just inclusivity." The team exchanged glances. Lisa, the barista who had been with the Hive from the beginning, raised her hand. "I love it. Let's do it. But what's the catch? Why would anyone come to a free event like that?" Charlie smiled. "Because it's not just about the event. It's about showing people that the Hive is here for them. It's about creating something that can't be sold. We're not just trying to pull in new customers. We're trying to remind the town why we're here." The idea was ambitious, but the team rallied behind it. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked tirelessly to organize the event. They reached out to local artists, musicians, and vendors. They created flyers, social media campaigns, and word-of-mouth buzz. The event was going to be massive, bigger than anything they'd done before. The day of the event arrived, and Charlie could feel the energy in the air. He stepped outside to see a crowd already gathering on the sidewalk. People were lining up to get inside, and the excitement was palpable. The hive was filled with people of all ages, from families to young professionals, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the sense of community. It wasn't just a free event, it was a statement. The hive was a place for everyone. And it felt like urban grind didn't stand a chance against the power of genuine connection. Charlie looked around the room, feeling a rush of pride. This was what he had always wanted the hive to be, a place where people could come together, not just for coffee, but for something more. And as he stood there, he realized one thing: they weren't fighting for customers anymore. They were fighting for what mattered. After the success of the free community event, the hive had regained its footing. The town buzzed with excitement, and Charlie had proven that his cafe was about more than just serving coffee. It was about creating lasting connections and offering an experience that couldn't be bought. People returned to the hive in droves, bringing their friends, neighbors, and families along with them. The event had shown the town what the hive stood for, and it reignited the sense of belonging that had originally made it special. But as the momentum continued to grow, Charlie realized that there was still work to be done. While the hive had made an impressive comeback, there was a lingering feeling that their battle with urban grind wasn't over. It was a rivalry that had only intensified with time. Urban grind wasn't going to let them take back the spotlight without a fight. And the real test was yet to come. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Charlie sat down with Tom, his confidant and the steadying force behind much of the hive's success. They'd been through a lot together, and today, Charlie knew they needed to discuss their next steps carefully. "Tom, we did it," Charlie said, leaning back in his chair. "That event was a hit. People are talking about us again, and I think we're finally starting to show that we're not just another cafe. But I'm starting to feel like the dust hasn't really settled. Urban grind is still out there, and I'm not sure if we've done enough to distance ourselves from them." Tom nodded, understanding Charlie's concerns. "I agree. We've got a great foundation now, but that doesn't mean they're going to back off. The reality is, Charlie, that urban grind has resources we don't have. They've got a polished brand and the backing to do things we can't. But what we do have, what we've always had, is our authenticity." Charlie leaned forward, looking at Tom with determination. "Right. But we need more than just authenticity. We need to give people a reason to choose us every time. Not just because we're real, but because we're offering something unique that they can't get anywhere else." There was a pause as Tom thought about Charlie's words. What if we doubled down on local partnerships? Instead of competing on the same front, we could create an entire brand experience that ties in with the local community. Let's show people that the hive is their cafe, something they've helped build. Charlie's eyes lit up. "I love that. What if we focused more on showcasing the talent here in town? Artists, musicians, even local small businesses. We could create a platform for them to share their work with our customers. We wouldn't just be a cafe. We'd be a movement, a cultural epicenter." The next few weeks saw a major shift in the hive's direction. Charlie and his team reached out to local artists, musicians, chefs, and even small business owners. They began planning regular showcases that would bring together the best talent from the area, offering them a space to share their work while giving the hive's customers an opportunity to discover something new. They hosted art installations, poetry readings, live acoustic performances, and even invited local food vendors to set up shop in the cafe's courtyard. It was a bold move, one that set them apart from urban grind even further. Urban grind was sleek, modern, and exclusive. But the hive was diverse, community-driven, and authentic. It became the go-to space for those who wanted to connect with the heart of the town. One evening, Charlie sat in the cafe, sipping a cup of his own freshly brewed espresso as he watched the crowd mingle. Local artists were displaying their paintings on the walls, while a band played soft, acoustic music in the background. It was everything Charlie had imagined when he opened the hive, a space where people could gather, share ideas, and discover new things. He felt a deep sense of pride. But just as he was beginning to relax, he noticed something unsettling. A familiar face walked through the door, Megan Reese, the food critic who had written that glowing review of Urban Grind just a few weeks ago. She walked confidently through the crowd, greeting people as she made her way toward Charlie's table. "Megan," Charlie greeted her with a warm smile. "It's nice to see you here." She returned the smile, though there was a professional air about her. "Charlie," she said, sitting down. "I wanted to come by and see for myself what all the buzz is about. I've heard a lot of great things about the Hive lately." Charlie nodded, his mind racing. He knew this was his chance to make a lasting impression. "Well, you're in the right place. We've been working hard to bring our community together, showcasing local talent, and offering a space where everyone feels welcome." Megan raised an eyebrow. "I've noticed. You've certainly made a name for yourself in town. But let's be honest, the competition's fierce. Urban Grind still has the edge when it comes to attracting the high-end crowd. How do you plan to keep up with them?" Charlie paused for a moment, considering his answer. He knew that Urban Grind still had the polished, high-end allure that attracted a certain demographic. But he also knew that the Hive had something that Urban Grind would never be able to replicate. "We're not trying to compete with them," Charlie said, his voice steady. "We're not about offering the fanciest drinks or hosting the most exclusive events. What we have is real. What we offer is the heart of this town. We're giving people a space to connect with the people and art around them. And that's something you can't buy." Megan regarded him thoughtfully for a moment. "You know, I've heard a lot of people talking about that very thing. Maybe there's more to the Hive than I realized." Charlie smiled. "There's always more beneath the surface if you take the time to look." A few days later, Megan's review of the Hive appeared online. Her words were measured but full of praise. She described the cafe as a sanctuary for the community, and noted how Charlie had created a space that wasn't just about coffee, but about something more meaningful. She even praised the local partnerships and the creative events that had made the Hive a unique part of the town's cultural fabric. The review was a game-changer. It wasn't just about a positive critique, it was about validation. Megan Reese, a critic who had once championed Urban Grind, had now turned her attention to the Hive, acknowledging its authenticity and the impact it was having on the community. Charlie felt a surge of relief, but he also knew the work wasn't over. Urban Grind was still out there, still striving for perfection. But now, Charlie felt more confident than ever in the direction they were heading. They had something Urban Grind didn't, a place where the community came together, where art and connection were the driving forces. And with that, Charlie knew that no matter how tough the battle got, the Hive had already won the most important fight of all. It had been several months since the successful event that revitalized the Hive, and Charlie could finally breathe easy. The cafe was thriving again, the community was embracing the new direction, and even Urban Grind seemed to have slowed its aggressive push for dominance. But just as things began to settle, Charlie knew that he couldn't rest on his laurels. The cafe world was constantly evolving, and one slip-up could cost everything. And just when he thought things were getting back to normal, a new problem emerged. It came in the form of a sleek new cafe down the block. The Roost, a new competitor that was younger, hipper, and even more high-tech than Urban Grind. The owners, a couple of local entrepreneurs who had made a name for themselves in the tech world, had opened up the cafe with an emphasis on using cutting-edge technology to improve the customer experience. The cafe was filled with futuristic self-ordering kiosks, augmented reality displays, and a coffee subscription service that promised to deliver the freshest beans from around the world to your door. It was everything the younger crowd wanted, trendy, high-tech, and effortlessly cool. The design was minimalist, with sleek white walls, soft lighting, and ultra-modern furnishings. At first, Charlie hadn't thought much of the Roost. It seemed like just another attempt at capitalizing on the latest trend. But as the weeks passed, he started to notice the subtle ways it was affecting his customers. People who used to come to the hive were now posting photos of themselves at the roost on social media. The cafe's tagline, "The future of coffee," seemed to resonate with the young, tech-savvy crowd that had always been so loyal to the hive. The buzz surrounding the roost grew louder, and Charlie couldn't ignore it any longer. One afternoon, Charlie found himself sitting in the back of the hive, staring at his laptop. The cafe was bustling with customers, the usual hum of conversations and clinking cups filling the space. But his mind wasn't in the cafe. It was on the roost, specifically, the rapidly growing number of patrons it seemed to be attracting. Tom, ever the steady hand, walked over with a cup of coffee in hand. He could sense the tension in the air. "You're thinking about the roost, aren't you?" he asked, sitting down beside Charlie. Charlie nodded, rubbing his temples. "Yeah. It's impossible not to. I've never seen anything like it before. They've got all the tech, the sleek design. It's like they're playing a different game than we are." Tom took a slow sip from his coffee, eyes narrowing in thought. "But Charlie, that's exactly it. They're playing a different game. We're not in competition with them in the same way. What we've got is the community, the authenticity. People come here because it's real. The roost may have the bells and whistles, but that's not what keeps people coming back in the long run." Charlie wasn't so sure. The technology-driven culture that the roost was fostering seemed to be exactly what the younger demographic was after. The customers who had once been so loyal to the hive were flocking to the roost, drawn in by its innovative features and futuristic vibe. He felt like he was losing his grip on the very customers he'd worked so hard to win back. "I get what you're saying, Tom," Charlie said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. People love the tech, the ease, the convenience. It's hard to compete with that." The next day, Charlie decided to visit the roost and see for himself what all the hype was about. As he walked in, he was immediately struck by the cafe's sleek design. The walls were lined with high-definition screens that displayed information about the coffee beans being used, the farmers who grew them, and even the brewing process. The self-ordering kiosks were everywhere, and the baristas moved in an almost robotic rhythm, preparing drinks with precision and speed. The most jarring part was the lack of human interaction. People sat at their tables, heads buried in their phones or laptops, hardly looking up as their drinks were delivered to them by touchless robots. It felt sterile, impersonal. It was clear that the focus was on convenience, not connection. Charlie sat down at a table, watching the customers around him. He saw groups of friends talking, but their conversations were distracted by the constant presence of their devices. They were engaged in the cafe experience, but not with each other. They were there for the novelty, not for the feeling of community. He left the roost feeling unsettled. He knew it wasn't the kind of place that resonated with him, but he couldn't ignore the fact that it was attracting exactly the kind of crowd he needed to win back. Over the next few days, Charlie spent more time at the hive, brainstorming ways to respond to the growing competition. He couldn't abandon what the hive stood for, its authenticity, its connection to the community. But he also knew he needed to evolve. He needed to find a way to bring the best of technology into the mix without losing the soul of the cafe. It wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't about to let the roost take everything from him. That's when it hit him. What if he could integrate technology into the hive, but in a way that actually enhanced the sense of community? Instead of competing directly with the roost on their level of tech sophistication, he could create a space where technology supported the experience, rather than replacing it. He began making plans for a series of interactive experiences that would blend the hive's welcoming atmosphere with cutting-edge technology. He would introduce an app that allowed customers to learn more about the coffee they were drinking, the local artists they were supporting, and even the music that was playing in the background. The app would also allow customers to vote on upcoming events, suggest artists to feature, and engage directly with the cafe's offerings. But, unlike the roost, this tech wouldn't isolate people, it would connect them. It would bring them closer together, helping them discover things they never knew they cared about. As Charlie and Tom began fleshing out their ideas, they made one thing clear: they weren't going to compromise on what made the hive special. They would use technology to enhance the experience, not replace it. The focus would always be on the people, the artists, the musicians, the coffee lovers. The hive was about more than just coffee. It was about creating a space where everyone could feel welcome, where every person had a story to share. And in that moment, Charlie realized that, no matter how flashy the competition became, there was something the hive had that could never be replicated: its heart. Charlie's mind raced as he mapped out the future of the hive. The competition with the roost had sparked something inside him. He wasn't about to let some sleek, tech-heavy cafe push his own vision of community and connection into the background. If anything, it was time for the hive to prove that heart could still triumph over the cold precision of technology. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. As much as he wanted to be the driving force behind every decision, Charlie had come to realize that the hive wasn't just his cafe, it was the town's. It was the people who filled it every day, who had supported him through thick and thin. If anyone could save the hive from the looming shadow of the roost, it was the very community that had made the hive their second home. Charlie gathered his team together one evening after hours. It was a small group: his baristas, a few loyal staff members, and Tom, but each person in the room had a unique passion for the cafe. They were the heart and soul of the hive, and he needed them now more than ever. "All right, everyone," Charlie began, standing in front of the chalkboard where a few rough ideas were sketched out. "We've got some competition. But more than that, we've got an opportunity. We need to show the town what makes us different. We need to create something that no amount of technology can replicate, an experience they can't get anywhere else." Tom nodded, taking a sip from his coffee. "So, what's the plan?" Charlie smiled, his confidence growing. "We're going to launch a series of community nights, interactive events that are rooted in what this cafe is all about: people, connection, and creativity. Think of it as a celebration of local talent, ideas, and artistry, all tied together by our coffee in a shared experience. It's going to be part showcase, part social event, and it's going to be something the roost could never pull off." The room was quiet for a moment as everyone processed the idea. Then, one by one, people began to nod, the excitement slowly building. "I love it," Sarah, one of the baristas, said enthusiastically. "We can set up small interactive art stations, have people create things right here while they sip their coffee. I can coordinate with some of the local musicians for live acoustic sets," said Mike, the cafe's sound engineer. "It'll give the space a real vibe, like it's a living, breathing place for creativity." Charlie's heart lifted. This was exactly what he needed. But he wasn't done yet. "And here's the kicker," he added, his voice full of excitement. "We're going to let our customers shape these events. They'll vote on what happens next. If someone wants to feature their art or share their poetry, we'll make it happen. This is about turning the hive into a living, breathing part of the community." The energy in the room was electric now, everyone brainstorming ideas. Charlie's team was behind him, and that gave him more confidence than anything else. They all shared the same vision: a cafe that was more than just a business, but a place where people felt welcome, inspired, and connected. The community nights kicked off a few weeks later. The first event, titled "Creativity on Tap," was an immediate hit. The hive was packed with locals who were eager to share their talents and passions. Some people brought in their own art to display, while others joined impromptu group activities, such as collaborative mural painting, poetry readings, and open mic acoustic performances. It wasn't just a showcase of talent, it was a celebration of everything that made their town unique. As the evening unfolded, Charlie stood back and watched. He saw people chatting, laughing, and genuinely connecting. There were no phones in sight. No distractions. Just people, face to face, sharing their experiences. And best of all, no one was rushing off to the roost or anywhere else. The hive was alive with energy. A few days later, Charlie received an unexpected call. It was Megan Reese, the food critic who had written the glowing review of the hive months ago. Her voice was warm and friendly as she introduced herself. "Charlie, I wanted to let you know that I've been hearing great things about your community nights. I actually came by last night, and I was impressed by what I saw. I think it's time I wrote a follow-up review." Charlie felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was the kind of press he needed. "I'd love that, Megan. We're trying something new, something that really reflects who we are and what we're about. I'm glad to hear you enjoyed the event." "Enjoyed is an understatement," Megan said, laughing. "I could see how much the community was involved in it. It's clear that the Hive is more than just a cafe, it's a hub for creativity and connection. I'll be honest, I was skeptical at first. But after seeing what you're doing, I can say that you're onto something special." Charlie's heart swelled with pride. He'd known that the Hive had something unique to offer, but hearing someone else recognize it made it feel all the more real. "Thank you, Megan. That means a lot." Megan paused for a moment, then added, "I'd love to feature the Hive in an upcoming article about local businesses that are truly making an impact. What you're doing is more than just business, it's about shaping the culture of this town. I think people need to know about it." Charlie grinned. This was exactly the kind of exposure they needed. "I'd be honored, Megan. Thanks for your support." As the days went by, word of mouth about the Hive's community nights spread like wildfire. The events became the talk of the town, with people from all walks of life showing up to participate. Families, artists, musicians, writers, and even local business owners, all coming together to share and celebrate what they loved. The social media buzz was also growing. People were posting pictures, tagging the Hive, and encouraging their friends to come out for the next event. It wasn't just about the coffee anymore, it was about the experience, the community, and the shared sense of belonging. And slowly, but surely, Charlie could feel the momentum shifting back in his favor. It wasn't just about fighting off the competition anymore. The Hive was becoming something bigger, something more profound. It was becoming a symbol of connection, a place where people could find their voice, their tribe, and their place in the world. A week later, Megan's review of the Hive appeared online. It was everything Charlie had hoped for. She called it the heart and soul of the community, praising the cafe for its commitment to fostering real human connections through art, creativity, and shared experiences. She highlighted the community nights as the perfect example of how a local business could be more than just a place to grab a cup of coffee, it could be a space where people could feel truly connected to one another. The article went viral, and the Hive's social media exploded with new followers. People from neighboring towns started planning visits, eager to experience the magic for themselves. As Charlie read through the comments and messages flooding in, he felt a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just about business success, it was about making a difference in his town. The Hive had become a cornerstone of the community, and nothing could take that away. But as the cafe grew in popularity, Charlie knew that this was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead. The Roost would continue to push for dominance, and there would always be new competitors on the horizon. But Charlie had something far more valuable than any gimmick or technology, he had the heart of his community. And that was something no one could ever replicate. The Hive was alive, bustling with energy, creativity, and the sense of unity Charlie had always dreamed of. The community nights were more than just a success, they had ignited something in the town that hadn't been there before. The cafe had become a hub for inspiration, a place where people gathered not only for coffee but for connection. The excitement around the events was palpable, and the social media presence was growing exponentially. But despite the newfound success, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The Hive was thriving, but so was the Roost. While the Hive was undoubtedly building something special, it was still a small community-centered cafe competing against a tech giant that could afford massive advertising campaigns and quick expansion. One afternoon, while Charlie was sitting in his office going over new event ideas with Tom, an unsettling thought crossed his mind: what if it wasn't enough? What if the Roost was outpacing them in ways they couldn't even foresee? Tom, Charlie said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. I keep thinking. We're doing great with the events, but is it enough? The Roost just keeps growing. They have that sleek, high-tech vibe, and I'm wondering if we're just a little behind on the curve. Tom leaned against the desk, folding his arms. Charlie, I get where you're coming from, but we're not trying to out-tech them. We're building something real, something they can't replicate. We've got heart, and that's what people want. I know, Charlie replied, but doubt lingered in his voice. But what if the heart isn't enough? What if people want convenience and technology more than anything else? Tom stood up, walking over to the window and staring out at the street. The truth is, Charlie, the Roost might have all the tech and flashy ads, but they can't offer what we do, at least, not in the same way. People don't just want a coffee shop, they want a place to feel like they belong. That's what the Hive is. And that's why it's going to last. Charlie looked at his friend, taking a deep breath. I know we have something special. I'm just worried about how much longer we can keep up with the competition. We're doing our best, but I don't know. It's like the world is shifting beneath us, and I'm not sure we can keep up. Tom walked over and placed a hand on Charlie's shoulder. You've built something amazing here. The Hive isn't just a business, it's a legacy. And legacies don't fade because of a flashy new tech startup. They last because of the people who support them. You've got that. Don't lose sight of it. The next few days felt like a blur for Charlie. He spent long hours at the Hive, working with his team to keep the energy alive. The community nights were still going strong, and more people were showing up each week. But the creeping doubt he had been feeling still gnawed at him. He needed a change, something that would allow the Hive to adapt to the evolving landscape without losing what made it special. As Charlie sat at the bar late one evening, flipping through ideas in his mind, he suddenly had an epiphany. It wasn't just about staying ahead of the competition. It wasn't just about embracing technology for the sake of it. The Hive needed to become part of the future, while still maintaining its soul. It needed to merge the best of both worlds, the human connection and the tech-driven innovation. Charlie grabbed his phone and immediately called Tom. I've got an idea. A big one. A few days later, Charlie presented his idea to his team, the Hive 2.0. It would still be about community, but with an added layer of innovation. They would incorporate the technology that customers loved, like interactive screens that displayed the origins of the beans, the ability to customize orders with a tap of a button, but in a way that enhanced the personal, hands-on experience. The baristas would still be the stars of the show, the heart of the cafe, but there would also be opportunities to use tech to make the experience more immersive. The concept would feature digital art displays by local artists that changed weekly, and customers could use a tablet at their table to vote for the next featured artist, choose the music playlist, or even suggest new event ideas. Charlie's goal wasn't to replace the human touch with tech, but to bring it all together in a cohesive, exciting way. And the most significant change? The Hive would partner with local businesses to create a shared, tech-savvy community. There would be joint promotions with nearby restaurants, bookstores, and art galleries, an interconnected network that supported each other, building a new digital and physical community in the heart of town. The Hive 2.0 concept was a game changer. It was the next step in evolving without sacrificing the core identity of the cafe. Charlie's vision for merging human connection with technological innovation began to take shape. The grand relaunch day arrived with anticipation filling the air. Local press, influencers, and regulars were all in attendance, eager to see what the Hive had in store. As people walked through the doors, they were greeted by the same cozy, familiar atmosphere they'd always loved, but with subtle upgrades. Interactive screens showcasing local art displayed next to cozy reading corners, and sleek tablet stations at every table gave customers the option to customize their drinks or engage with the cafe in new ways. "Welcome to Hive 2.0, Charlie said as he stood at the front, his voice warm but full of excitement. "We've taken everything you love about the Hive, and we've added a new twist. It's still our same passion for community, creativity, and connection, only now, we've incorporated a bit of innovation to make it even better." People looked around, clearly impressed. The seamless blend of tech and human touch was exactly what they'd been missing. And most importantly, the feeling of belonging, of connection, was still there, stronger than ever. Over the next few weeks, the community rallied behind the Hive in a way that made Charlie's heart swell with pride. The cafe was busier than ever, and while the Roost still had its following, it was clear that the Hive had found its niche. The combination of technology and human connection had created a unique space that couldn't be duplicated by a high-tech machine or a slick ad campaign. Charlie's fears slowly faded, replaced by a sense of fulfillment. The Hive wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. It had become a place where people could get their coffee, yes, but also find inspiration, make new friends, and become part of something bigger. The future was uncertain, but Charlie knew one thing for sure: the Hive was ready for whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the windows of the Hive, casting soft beams over the familiar wooden tables and mismatched chairs. The hum of conversations, the clink of coffee cups, and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine created a rhythm that Charlie had come to cherish. This was his world, this was his home. And after all the trials and challenges, it was still standing stronger than ever. The last few months had been a whirlwind. After launching Hive 2.0, the cafe had not only secured its place as the heart of the community but also garnered the attention of people outside their small town. There were whispers about the Hive being a model for other local businesses to follow, and the idea of merging tech with human connection was gaining momentum. The collaboration with local businesses was flourishing, and each community night seemed to outdo the last. The Hive had become a hub of creativity and collaboration, where people from all walks of life came together to share their passions. It was everything Charlie had dreamed of when he first opened the cafe, only now, it was more than he could have imagined. But there was still one more obstacle to face. Charlie had received an invitation to a prestigious event, the local Business Leadership Summit. It was a chance to be recognized alongside the most successful business owners in the region. The invitation was a big deal. The summit was known for featuring the best and brightest, those who had made a significant impact on their communities and industries. And for Charlie, it felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for. When the invitation had arrived, Charlie had been hesitant. Part of him wanted to decline. The Hive had grown, yes, but he wasn't in it for the recognition or accolades. He was in it for the people, the community that had supported him from day one. But Tom, of course, had convinced him to go. "You've earned it, Charlie," Tom had said, his voice full of pride. "It's not just about you, it's about everything the Hive represents. You've created something that's making a real difference. Go, be proud of it." And so, Charlie had agreed to attend. But even as he prepared for the event, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a business recognition. It felt like a final test, a chance to prove that the Hive wasn't just a coffee shop, but a movement. The day of the summit arrived, and Charlie stood in front of the Grand Hotel where the event was being held. It was a sleek, modern building that stood in stark contrast to the Hive's cozy, rustic vibe. But there was a certain excitement in the air. The recognition was nice, but Charlie knew that what really mattered was what came next. As he walked through the doors, he was greeted by other business owners and entrepreneurs, people who had built successful companies through innovation, branding, and technology. Charlie felt out of place for a moment, unsure of how he fit into this world of polished suits and high-powered meetings. But as he scanned the room, he quickly realized something: these were not his people. His people were at the hive, sitting at mismatched tables, sharing stories, and creating together. That was where his heart was. The event kicked off, and Charlie was introduced to the crowd. He took the stage, the bright lights above casting a shadow over him as the audience looked on. His nerves started to settle, and his voice grew steadier with each word. "I never set out to build a business," Charlie began. "I set out to build a community. A place where people could come together, connect, and feel like they belonged. The hive was never just about selling coffee, it was about creating something that made people feel alive. That was my mission from day one." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "I believe that every business has the potential to make a difference in the world. But it's not just about the product, it's about the people. It's about creating a space where people can find themselves, find each other, and grow together." A wave of warmth washed over him as he spoke. The words were true, and he could feel it in his soul. This wasn't about winning an award or receiving a plaque on the wall. It was about creating something that would live on long after he was gone. After the speech, Charlie was approached by several attendees, each offering congratulations and praise. But one man stood out, a man with a warm smile and a handshake that felt genuine. "I loved your speech," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've built something truly remarkable. I'm Bill Larson. I own a chain of local cafes around the state, and I've been looking for new ways to connect with my customers. What you've done with the hive is incredible. I'd love to talk to you about a partnership." Charlie's heart skipped a beat. This was the kind of opportunity he'd never imagined, an opportunity to expand the hive's influence even further. But as he looked into Bill's eyes, he knew that whatever path they chose, it had to stay true to the core values of the hive. "I'm happy to talk," Charlie said, his voice steady. "But I'll be honest with you, Bill. If we're going to collaborate, it has to be about more than just profits. It has to be about the people. The heart of the hive can't be lost in the process. If we're in this together, it's because we believe in creating something that lasts, something that people truly care about." Bill smiled. "I get it. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Let's talk more." As Charlie left the summit later that day, he felt a sense of clarity. The hive had come full circle. What started as a small cafe had turned into something far more significant than he could have ever imagined. The community he'd built was no longer just a place for coffee, it was a symbol of everything that was possible when people came together with passion and purpose. The future of the hive was brighter than ever, and while the road ahead would continue to be full of challenges, Charlie knew he was ready for whatever came next. Because as long as the hive stayed true to its roots, community, connection, and creativity, it would always have a place in the hearts of the people it served. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?